In this lecture, we'll take a look at the various dimension tools and how we can change our drawing preferences. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to be using this bracket here. And if you'd like to draw the same, then please refer to these dimensions here. And you can model that up. I think that's quite a good exercise at this point. And if we take a look at this part, it's fairly generic. We've just got one extrusion, we've got 4 threaded holes, and we've got the simple hole in the center with no thread. And then we have these 2 bosses on the outside. So let's create a 2D drawing of this and apply some dimensions to it. So before we create a drawing, let's check first of all what our preferences are when it comes to drawings. Let's come up to our account at the top. I'm going to select Preferences, left click once. Then in here we want to come under General, and then if I just hide all these, and to come down to Drawing here, make sure that's selected, and we want to check that everything here is correct. So this is all good, and under the projection angle, I'm going to go in this case from 3rd angle. So make sure you've got this tick box checked. That will let you overwrite the default ISO standards. And then under linear precision, we can state there how many decimal places we want to show. And we can also adjust this independently for dimensions when we're in the 2D drawing environment, which I'll show you in a bit. Also, in terms of the point, so I typically use a decimal point. You can change to comma as well. I'm going to stay for decimal for now. Let's click OK. And now we can come over to the Environments tab, hit the drop down, go on Drawing from Design. Then in our toolbox here, make sure we're under Manual. I'm going to create a drawing from scratch. I'm going to go with the ISO millimeters, A3 sheet size, and landscape orientation. Click OK. Let's go ahead and add a base view. So this is quite small for this sheet size. I'm going to bump up the scale. Let's go for 1 to 1.5. Input the base view, click OK. I'm going to hit P on the keyboard, so project, select this view here, put in a top view, going to put in a side view, and I'll put in a ISO view as well. Hit the green tick, move this over here. I'm going to double click on this, put that in shaded, so let it close. And on the top view, I want to show the center marks for all of these holes. So double left click under center marks, select hole, and you'll see there that the 4 holes, I've used the hole feature, so they'll have center marks. And then also I want to include the round cuts as well, which is just the simple hole in the center. Click close. For the base view and the side view, I'm going to keep the hidden edges on. I think that's quite valuable detail to show, considering it shows that the holes here are through. We don't have to label that either in a leader or a note. So in terms of dimensions, if we come up to the top, we have the Dimensions tab just here. We hit the drop down there, and we'll see there are many different dimensions available. However, in 95% of cases, we only need to use the General Dimension tool, which is D, and that enables us to use the vast majority of different dimensions here, and we can change between them. But in some cases, we might want to use some specific dimensions here, such as the arc length dimension. So mostly we're going to be using the Dimension tool, and Fusion also has a Auto Dimension tool built in. So if I select this, let's see how it comes out. As this part is fairly simple, Fusion in this case has done quite a good job of dimensioning this part, although it's very hectic. And definitely when we're working with more complex parts, if we're using Auto Dimension, it can look really messy on our sheet. But in this case, we're not going to go with Auto Dimension, but that feature is available if you want to use it. Let's jump in and apply some dimensions then. Let's hit D on the keyboard, so General Dimension. And I'm going to apply a dimension for the total length of this part from this corner here to this corner. So very simple, just left click once on the corner and left click once on this corner. Fusion will identify the distance according to the part that we drew. Then we just quite simply left click once to input that dimension. Let's do the same for the extrusion height. So this point here to this point, put in the 10. Let's do the same as well from the total length from this corner to this corner. So that is essentially the distance from this face to the corresponding opposite face over here. So this corner point, click here. And as we see in this dimension, there is 1 decimal place. So we've got the 0.5, whereas we don't have that reflected over here. And that's because these dimensions don't have any decimal places. And so Fusion will automatically pick up on that for us, which is quite handy. But in this case, if we did want to remove the 0.5, I don't see why we would, but we can do that by double clicking on the dimension, and then we can make any changes here. So for example, under linear dimension, if I put that as 0 decimal places, we'll see now it's just 141 in this case, so it's rounded up. But I'm going to put that back to, well, the default is 2 decimal places, but in this case we only need 0.1. So I'm going to go with the default, press close, and then we have that dimension there. Let's move over to the top view. So this is where most of our dimensions will be. Let's hit D on the keyboard and have a look at this radius here. So what's great about the dimension tool is we'll pick up this as a radius and therefore give it a radius. And so we don't need to then go into the dimension tool and select and specifically select the radius dimension. We can just use the general dimension tool and Fusion will pick up on that. We can left click once, place that dimension where we want. Let's take a look at this circle in the center. So if I hit D on the keyboard, Fusion will recognize it's a circle and apply a diameter. However, in the case that we did want to apply a radius, it wouldn't be possible to do so in the dimension tool. So an instance like this where we might want to specifically select radius dimension, and then any item we select, such as this here, will be displayed then as a radius. I'm going to use the dimension tool, put in a diameter there, it's 25 mil. And then we can add the other dimensions to confirm the position of this. Let's go from the center point then. Let's go to this point here, add in this dimension. Again, from the center point, let's go to this point here. And you'll see here that the dimension tool is giving us an aligned dimension. And what's great about this tool is that as we move the mouse around, Fusion will adjust the dimension accordingly. So we can put in this dimension here, or this dimension, and we can move the mouse around like so. So I'm going to go with the dimension that we're after, in this case 90, drop that in there. And let's also do a distance from this line here. So select that line to this line, draw that across, and then you'll see we've got the 1 decimal point there. And we can go back and edit these dimensions as well. So let's say this one is 90. We've got no decimal places, right? We can double click on that. And then under the linear position, we're showing 2 decimal places, but there's no trailing zeros selected. So if we select trailing zeros, press close, we can then show those trailing zeros specifically for this dimension. And we would only use that if we wanted to highlight some fundamental information that was perhaps a bit unclear otherwise. Now, if we move on to dimensioning up these threaded holes here, let's use the dimension tool, zoom in on one of these. As we bring the mouse over this arc here, we'll see it's giving us a radius and we've got a diameter on the inside there. But that's not the detail that we want to get across about these threaded holes. And so in this case, we wouldn't use the dimension tool and we would use a note. So we'll come back up to, in this case, we're going to use text. We're going to select note. We're going to click on to this hole here, drag that out, left click once, press OK on the toolbar. And there we see we've got these 4 holes here, all M10 by 1.5 thread, class 6H. So I'm going to go ahead now and add the rest of the dimensions for the part. Very straightforward process, and I'll speed up the video for this. And we can also add in angles as well. So for example, where this boss sits off this line here, we can use the dimension tool by selecting this line, and then you'll see it will give us that angle to add there. We can drop that in, or alternatively, we could come under the dimension and we could add an angular dimension, which will only pick up on angles. So if I select these 2 lines here, we've got that angle there. So that's an overview of the dimension tool. It's nice and simple to use. Again, for very simple parts, we might want to use auto dimension, but as I say, 95% of cases, we'd end up using the dimension tool. And only if we had a lot of entities and perhaps complexity in our part, we might want to specifically identify the type of dimension that we want to give. And so I'll see you in the next lecture where we take a look at adding tolerances.